The first question, because I am moderator, I get to ask my own question first. What would be the first thing that you would suggest that we change in Kingston?
It's difficult to say the first thing because, of course, I don't know what's already in place. But I think the things that there does need to be a shared vision about the future of the city. And in the conversations that I've had with people, I haven't heard any differences of opinion, although I have noticed a habit of people being contrary in how they sometimes behave in the discussions. But I don't notice anything in what different people have said about the future of the city that is inconsistent. So I think that should be crystallized into something that's simple and clear and visionary and compelling for everyone. I think that would be very helpful. And then I think you need to pick one project and do it brilliantly. Mm-hmm. And, I'm lucky enough to be staying at the Rock Hotel, and of course my host is Stephen. So I look at that hotel and I think that's one project done brilliantly. And I think if you continue as groups and together to do simple things really well, there will be a big improvement. Of course, a lot of my conversation in the last 2 days has been about the downtown and about the waterfront. So a proper plan for the downtown, maybe a city improvement district for the downtown, maybe a proper revitalisation effort around the waterfront to create something that's for everyone. There's talk of a coastal park that is for everyone. I think these are brilliant ideas, and I would rather you focused on doing 1, 2, 3 things well than thinking you've got to do 30 things at once, because 30 things at once isn't going to work.
So I would say one of the great things and I've talked a lot about the great things about working at Panjam, but one of the great things is that over the last 2 days I've spent a bit of time with Greg. And you've spoken quite a bit about low-hanging fruit in our conversations. What would you say are some of the low-hanging fruit for us to pick?
Well, one piece of low-hanging fruit is your soft power. So if you think about the DNA of Kingston, the DNA of Jamaica, and you know who your national heroes are, you know what the cultural resonance is of Kingston and Jamaica around the world. I don't see that huge asset being properly deployed on your behalf yet. It's almost like you've got this global soft power slightly accidentally. So I think you should become intentional around the story, the brand, the proposition, the incredible creative dynamism of the place. So that would be one thing I would do. I think the other thing that would be low-hanging fruit is obviously now to pursue the waterfront story because of the aspirational investment that's been made, not just at the Rock, but in some of the other buildings around and about. You should really do that. Mm-hmm. I think that would be low-hanging fruit to really get at. And I'm intrigued by the idea that some of the senior people in government are discussing, which is about, whether to reconsolidate the government buildings and the parliament and the ministries in a certain location. That's actually a much longer term project, I would say. But, the waterfront is already happening. The brand already exists. So why not really focus on managing those two? Mm-hmm. And managing the waterfront better will bleed into getting a comprehensive approach to the inner city overall, which I think is key, or the downtown area. There's many other things, but I do think that's where you've already got momentum and you just need to augment it, complete it. In any city, Joe, I'm sure everybody in the room knows this. Every city in a certain way has a crisis of confidence, right? And the Medellin story or the Miami story is so important in that regard. Because when bad things have been happening or reputation has been less than it should be, or when, people have been dissing you, as it were, from outside, it does reduce confidence. So confidence building activities and deliberately doing confidence building activities, I think is really important. So that's why waterfront, downtown, brand probably are the ones I would go for.
So part of the other conversations that we've been having with Greg have been, and I would say your response has always been, this is not unique to Jamaica, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? And so I'll ask you, do you see any unique challenges that we have in Jamaica?
I haven't seen anything here that I think is totally unique, no. But what I have seen is that there's a dramatic gap between the potential of the place, which is exponential, and what's been achieved in the last sort of 10 to 20 years, where I think that, and I don't know what the reasons are, and I'm not pointing fingers at anyone or anything, because I don't know. But I think that, the reason I spent a lot of time talking about this century of the city is because for about 40 years, other cities have been getting on board with this idea of reurbanization, the opportunity of the city creating a new kind of space. And of course, you've had one or two very distinguished people in the city doing that. But I don't get the sense that there's been a very strong coalition there. So what's unique, if you want to put it that way, is that the scale of the opportunity is so great, but somehow you seem to have had 2 or 3 cycles of initiative taking which haven't succeeded. And I don't know why that is. I'd like to know why that is, because, that needs fixing, right? But it seems to me that's the honest thing I can say, that the potential is enormous, but the momentum has been stilted, and I don't know why.
I think that would be an interesting set of discussions. There are a number of people in this room who I think could give you very unique and tailored answers and opinions to that question.
Can I say one more thing?
Absolutely.
I was going to say one more thing. I think that there may be, and again, I'm not making a criticism of anyone, there may be a tendency to look at what's gone wrong in the past and to, as it were, engage in a kind of an orgy of lamentation, right? And actually what you need to do is just look forward.
Yes.
Yeah? All you need to do is say, okay, the past is the past. Something didn't work because, it didn't work.
Yes.
But now is the time it can work.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
And I mean, it's an obvious thing to say, but we need to have a forward-looking perspective. This time is different, and it's different for all sorts of reasons. Let's do it now. Let's get on with the cycle now. That seems clear to me.
Absolutely. Okay. I'm going to take the top question. I encourage you to keep voting on the questions as well. If we are already caught in a cycle of bad urbanization, we have a socially stratified city. How do we change that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the biggest question, right, that you face, because the risk is that you go for a cycle of good urbanization, and the consequence is that you do it in pockets or in patches, and there's a perception that some people benefit more than others, right? And this is why actually I'm a big skeptic about this 15-minute city idea, because 15-minute city works fine if you're already in a city that's got a fantastic transport system and brilliant schools and hospitals everywhere, but otherwise it's just a recipe for segregation. So we don't really want that. So I think that what we have to notice is that people who are living in the poorest homes and are living in the poorest neighborhoods with the least services and the least access to opportunities are the most likely to become disenfranchised by a process, right? And so what we have to do very deliberately, I think, is build a process that includes them and addresses their needs. So I always say to people, homes and jobs and opportunities for children, very important. And in particular, the health dimension of that has become really key. If you look at the life expectancy differences of people living in different parts of the city, it becomes very obvious. So how do you do that when the subject of this conversation is not complete reform of the healthcare or the education system? It's about urban revitalisation. Well, I think you do have to build some platforms for creating much better housing for people. And there are many examples around the world. We didn't talk about them in today's lecture, but there are many examples around the world of community-led, faith group-led, self-help style of community housing that enables us to produce better housing for people. Lots of examples around the world of how you stabilize neighborhoods where poorer people are living and you create better services and infrastructures for them. And then I think what we heard about in the discussions about Medellin and the examples I was giving you from Cancun and elsewhere, lots of opportunities to use enterprise development, to use supply chains, to use, obviously, direct employment. There are lots of mechanisms where, as the city rises, people who live in the poorest community can be taken with you. And I usually say, and I say this often when I'm working in Africa, that, there are three kinds of tools. There are tools that promote growth, there are tools that promote development, and there are tools that promote inclusion. And you need to use all three, and you need to not expect the tools that promote growth will automatically create the inclusion. You've got to have specific tools to do that. It's a very obvious and simple way of putting it. But I think it sometimes there's a kind of a political philosophy that says if you get growth, everything else will work out. Or if you just do inclusion, everything works. Actually, you need growth, you need development, and you need inclusion. There are different tools for each.
Okay. Fantastic, thank you. There has been a major emphasis on build it and they will come. But how do you balance city profitability with city livability without displacing the people who live in cities?
Right, so there's two parts to that question, I think. So I don't believe in build it and they will come. That's never been my view. I think you have to make a place really attractive. That's more than building it. That's about place design, that's about invitation, that's about activation and animation. A lot of what I've been saying to people this week is that place management is actually about creating a sense of place, not just creating a facility. And many people in the room know this, but it's a point that's well worth making. So I don't think it's about building it and they will come. I think it's activate it and they will come, right? If you want to use it very simply. And so the second half of the question was, is there a risk that creates exclusion? So we have to build shared spaces in our cities. I mean, one of the lessons from the work I've done in Lebanon, in Belfast, and in other post-crisis cities is that public space is very important because you have to create spaces where the whole community can enjoy something. And any of you who've been to Havana in Cuba, or those of you who've been any time recently to Tel Aviv in Israel or to Barcelona will know that the waterfront space in those cities is the Central Park, as it were. And that's the place where once you've got your shorts on, nobody knows, unless they look carefully at the brand of your shorts, what your income group is, right? So there's something about public space, and particularly beaches and waterfronts, as a great equalizer. So I'm not saying this is a total solution to socioeconomic inequality, right? So whoever asked the question, please know I didn't say that. But what I would say is that the more shared space you can create, the more of a sense of common ownership of the city people will have. You see, the city belongs to everyone. So let's design it and make it in such a way that everyone gets to enjoy it.
I think you've addressed this, but I'm going to ask this question anyways, just in case you wanted to add anything. What are some of the ways that a city can shift away from more archaic ideas of placemaking and shift towards more progressive placemaking and good urbanism?
Yeah, okay, that's a very good question. I mean, the point I would make is that the old ideas about placemaking were essentially that if the design was good, it would work. And what I hope I said sufficiently in the lecture is that actually we need our cities to be different things on different times of the day, different days of the week, different weeks of the year, different seasons of the year. So we need our places to be very agile, which is why I'm focusing much more on this idea of activation and animation and active management rather than just place design. Good design is very, very important. So architecture students, I didn't say good design is not important. But good design on its own is not sufficient, I think will be the point I would make. I think that we've got to have this much more activist approach to how we remake place every day in different ways. See, if cities are going to focus on habitat, innovation, and experience, part of that is about surprise. So you have to be able to surprise people in the way that you manage public space and in the opportunities you invite them for. There has to be something different happening every night of the week, not something the same happening every night of the week. And I think that part of the challenge about getting rid of this idea that the city centre may not be safe is to activate it more actively, invite more people to come in. It's the presence of people on the street that makes the city safe, right?
Our next question is, how important is a well-managed transport system to the development of any thriving city and nation on a whole?
How important? It's very, 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 very important. I mean, one of the things that did surprise me when Stephen very kindly took me on a tour of the city centre yesterday was just, these 3-lane highways going up and down. I think everybody knows now that 3-lane highways reduce the quality of place. You can't dwell, you can't stop, there's no, you get what we call road kill rather than street life, right? So I think that there is going to need to be a transition, which I've seen happen in the South African cities, because I've been part of that, with the introduction of bus rapid transit, the creation of light rail and other things. There will have to be a transition ultimately away from lots and lots of small vehicles with internal combustion engines charging up and down those streets, not just because that's an inefficient transport system. It's not the best way for people to go about their lives, get to work, etc. But it also militates against the quality of the place that you want to have, because essentially, as soon as you walk out of the door of any building, you're confronting a motorway, although it might be a motorway that looks like a traffic jam. So I think that this is a big challenge, and if I did have the chance to talk to the government, I think Pedro said this in the first lecture, that some kind of metropolitan transport system of mixed modes. Obviously, you've got to go for what's affordable. So bus rapid transit, better buses in general will be important. Obviously, I saw the bus garage yesterday that I understand, is hardly being used and that kind of thing. So there are lots of issues here to be sorted out, but a proper transport system is the critical key for any city, both to realize its social ambitions, its economic ambitions, the quality of its experience, but also its carbon agenda, right? If you're gonna decarbonize the city, you're gonna have to move people out of cars.
Absolutely.
As people are so warmly reacting, I should say one more thing, Joe, that the thing that I see in almost every city I visit around the world is that there is now an active plan in almost every city to reduce car usage, right? Almost every city now. This is not new magic. This is established orthodoxy.
Okay. Our next question is, where does the Line City in Saudi Arabia fall on the spectrum? Is it potentially the best example of a blended city?
That's a very good question, isn't it? So
there may be some people in the audience, including me, who don't know.
Okay, so the Saudi Arabian government is involved in many exciting projects at the moment. So one of them is about doubling the size of Riyadh from a city of 7 million people to a city of 15 million people. Another one is the redevelopment of Jeddah, the ancient port city of Saudi, to create a really vibrant kind of new Jeddah, as it were. But then there are 2 other projects. One is called Neom, and the other is called The Line. So The Line is essentially a linear city going all the way from where from where Neom will be built, which is a completely new city, to the coast. And the idea is, instead of having a city that is clustered together in one place, it's just a linear city. Digitization is a key part of what they're trying to do. They're using it to develop 21st and 22nd century technologies. It's an innovation zone for urban tech, as we like to call it. And they think that this is not just a way of accommodating a whole set of activities in Saudi, but it's also a laboratory for the world in future urbanism. I am personally doubtful about whether this project will realize these goals. And I think I'm doubtful partly because I'm more interested in how we retrofit and reinvent existing cities than how we build new cities, even though I can see it's entirely a credible proposition that you should build new cities, particularly where you need them. But I also don't believe that the financial discipline that's required and the project discipline that's required to make this a big success is yet in place. So I'm doubtful about whether it will actually deliver on its vision.
So just a follow-up for that. So do you believe that but there is potential for blended cities, just not.
Oh, sure. Sorry.
Just
So the
not
blended
this one.
city part, I mean, this is an idea I came up with a couple of years ago, and people said, the end of the pandemic, cities are dead. I said, no, cities are not dead. They're now blended. And what I think I mean by that is that increasingly you'll have people who use the city by living in it or going to it every day or 2 days a week or 3 days a week. And other times they'll be participating in what happens in the city using digital platforms. Now, if you take that to its logical extreme, it would be possible to own and operate a business in Kingston, but to live somewhere else, in another country, not just in another part of Jamaica, right? Because digitization allows you to do that. So it gives rise to all of us, I think, if we're involved in activities where digitization is possible, of us being able to be partially in one city and partially in another city. Now, you see a version of this coming with some of the cities in the Middle East and some of the cities in the ASEAN region, where they will provide people with a kind of digital visa. So you're allowed to own a business, you're allowed to own land, but you don't have to live there. It's the city by subscription, the city as a platform. So I think that in the longer term, Joe, this is not a kind of current opportunity for Kingston, I would suggest to you. But in the longer term, you will have a version of what we've got used to as the kind of non-dom expats. And you see them, of course, in the Bahamas and elsewhere, yeah? So people who live in one place, but actually their assets are somewhere else and they operate a business somewhere else. We will have versions of that for ordinary people, not just for the super rich, because you will have through digitization a choice. And that will create cities that are more blended because of lives that are more hybrid.
Okay, understood. Thank you very much. It is now 6:15. I know we're having a great time, Michael, and I would love to keep going, but I promised that I would end at 6:15. There are still, I think 8 questions, and as I promised...
Do you want to try and do quick ones? So, like 10-second answers, so that I will try to do short answers if you do the short questions.
Anna, this is not my fault. This is Greg's.
Don't want to leave people
Okay.
dissatisfied.
Okay. What effect do you think ESG will have on urban revitalization? 10 seconds, go.
It will make us focus more on the decarbonization of the place, and it will make us focus more on the inclusion of the people who live in the poorer areas.
Okay, perfect. If a city is dying while near cities are rising, where do you focus?
Well, my view is that we should never allow any city to die.
Perfect. You guys have to stop submitting questions. It's not a game. Please. In what way is the decentralization of city infrastructure through development of remote networks and the creation of smarter cities considered in this new era?
It's an embedded part of the whole platform, but be careful with decentralization, because if you remember my point about the magic of cities, you need the centralization as well.
Okay, great. Is there evidence that countries with more autonomous local governments have a higher probability of achieving good urban development outcomes?
In general, yes, but in specific cases, more autonomous local governments are more likely to go bust.
It's like school challenge quiz. This is great. What are your thoughts on how we can use mixed-use developments as a strategy and the role it plays in the urbanization of the city?
All developments need to be mixed use.
Would Nassau not be an example of that would be closer for Kingston to follow?
Which one?
Nassau.
Nassau. Nassau has a slightly different set of problems, but it is, I think, a city that could have a partnership with Kingston. I agree. I think that there are things to learn both ways.
These guys are still submitting questions. I'm taking 2 more. The size of our natural harbor has been a key value proposition for the development of a logistics hub economy. How can this coincide with urban renewal?
Can coincide perfectly with it. It's exactly the sort of thing that Kingston needs to prioritize as part of a diversified economy. And I'm optimistic about pan-Caribbean trade being a key driver of that.
Okay. How do we effectively use PPPs in a city such as Kingston, where informality and spontaneity are defining both positive and negative characteristics of its experience?
I don't see any contradiction between informality and spontaneity in using PPPs, but you do need to figure out business models that will be sustainable. So I would suggest some small experiments.
Okay. I think that's it.
Okay.